Deontay Wilder being led to the slaughter in Tyson Fury Trilogy fight. Knuckleheads, welcome to the Fighters Rep, where we give you free fights, interviews in the fight game, and fight commentary from the mind of a promoter slash attorney. You know, for the life of me, I cannot understand why Deontay Wilder and his team have chosen to exercise the rematch clause and go right back in to this fight against Tyson Fury. I'm bringing this topic up because it looks like the fight is going down on December 19th at Allegiant Stadium, the new home of Raider Nation. And it sounds like Bob Arum is hopeful that there will be about 10 to 15,000 people in attendance. Now, my problem with this fight is, unless you've been living under a rock or have never watched boxing or combat sports before, if you watch those first two fights, you saw a huge gap in boxing skill. A huge gap in boxing skill. In the first fight, even though Tyson Fury got dropped twice, you gotta keep in mind that the guy had lost over 100 pounds before going into that fight, greatly compromising his chin and his ability to take a shot. You also have to realize that he'd been out of the ring 2.5 years doing drugs and abusing his body and just was not the same guy that he was when he fought Klitschko, and was definitely not the same guy that we saw in there against Deontay Wilder in the second fight. And as we saw in the second fight, that gap in skill really showed itself and continued to evolve, right? Sans the physical problems that Tyson Fury had in the first fight. He was able to take a shot. He was bigger. He was stronger. He looked better. And it's only gonna fare even worse, in my opinion, for Deontay Wilder in the third fight if he goes straight into it, because now you have a guy in Deontay Wilder who took his first L of his career, and it was in devastating and slightly humiliating fashion, where his corner had to throw in the towel even though he didn't want them to, right? And he also suffered the first technical knockout loss of his career in the pros, and he took tremendous damage in that fight. I mean, I believe people were saying that he had a dent in his skull from the force and from the blunt force trauma he was taking in that fight. So I can't for the life of me figure out why Deontay Wilder's team wouldn't take a fight in the interim, maybe two fights in the interim, try to bridge the skill gap a little, try to work on some things that you can employ to give you the best chance possible to beat Tyson Fury. Now, I'm not referring to these things as tune-up fights because I feel like they're more strategy-building fights, right? I feel like tune-up fight is a cheap term that you give to somebody that's not that good and doesn't have any confidence. But there's definitely a skill gap. And I don't see anything wrong with a guy in Deontay Wilder taking a couple fights, perhaps against boxers similar to Tyson Fury, to get him ready to try to get his WBC strap back. Also, as somebody who would love to advise Deontay Wilder and who's advised countless fighters, even the ones that have competed for us, I would tell him that by taking those couple fights in the interim, you could allow Tyson Fury to go and potentially unify the belts against Anthony Joshua. And at that point, if Tyson Fury wins that fight, which he probably would because he seems to be the superior boxer in the heavyweight division, you could then have your best chance against not only getting your WBC belt back, but getting all the belts back. I just don't understand, knuckleheads, for the life of me, what the rush is. Why at the age of 34 years old in the heavyweight division, Deontay Wilder insists on going back in there with Tyson Fury. And I say 34 years old, and I make that a point, and I emphasize that because we've seen heavyweights in boxing continue to dominate well into their 40s, right? And I specifically want to bring up Vladimir Klitschko. That's somebody that comes to mind. So in the heavyweight division of combat sports, guys can get better and guys can dominate into their 40s. I'm not sure why Deontay Wilder and his team are not taking advantage of that. And if I were on the team As an American fight fan especially, knowing he's our American heavyweight hopeful, I would tell him, dude, sit your ass down. You don't need to go into this fight. There's a lot more to gain for waiting a couple fights and building yourself up prior to taking that fight, and it doesn't make you look like any sort of coward. So knuckleheads, I just don't understand it. Tell me what you would do if you were advising Deontay Wilder. Would you have him jump straight into this trilogy fight, or would you have him take a couple fights in the interim? In my opinion, he's being led to the slaughter, and I don't like it. Knuckleheads, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, the bell notification icon next to it. Join Knucklehead Nation. Help me build this channel and the only kickboxing promotion that matters. Also, if you haven't already, get your Fighters Rep gear in the link below. We got shirts, tanks, hoodies, masks. Because if you don't have your Fighters Rep gear, then you just don't know shit about fighting. Knuckleheads, we'll talk soon.